Welcome back to the Techno-Communism Conversation. Welcome back to the Cybernetic Communism Conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. And I'm going to discuss some things of relevance to me in the past hours, and relate that to the subject of this perhaps more nebulous title. There was no Messiah because there was no machine. Like this nom de guerre that I use, certain of my instincts tell me that I should not use this kind of language. I consider religious literalist language of any kind, of any tradition, to be tending to be a tool of the bourgeoisie. That's not controversial, not a controversial thing to serious thinkers, people like scientific communists, who understand that the function of this thing is not to give people hope or make them more moral, but it's to make them more compliant with the status quo wherever they would happen to be, whatever that would happen to be. And that impulse, that slavish impulse, is why people react quite badly to criticisms of religious literalism and God belief and the superstitions that prevail in their place or time. It's not because it's so upsetting to be told that magical fairies do not exist. It's because it's forcing them to confront their servile nature. And so every time I introduce myself as Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological New Jerusalem, cringe a little bit. And every time I use some word like this in the title, I cringe a little bit. But this is also just the language. I did not learn any other language as I hugged my mother's coattails, but English, and the English of the North American, and that is a language rife with problems. It is essentially the language of white supremacy. It's the language of the Eurocentric paradigm, that's to say. It is the influence of violent Christianism and the larger so-called Judeo-Christian tradition, which is really much the same thing, that language is tied to. There's no way for me to have a good conversation. There's only ways to try to have slightly better conversations than I would otherwise be having. Well, I'll go back to what I was saying. I was at a makerspace, which provides a valuable service to the community. I won't mention them by name or describe them at length right now. I have on this channel before kind of endorsed them, but what I'm going to say now is a little different, so I've just assume kind of make them more anonymous. It wouldn't mean anything to you at all anyway, um, unless you've been to the United States and are spending time in this Metro Phoenix area, where I often spend time. Um, and I was at this makerspace, which was founded by um, anti-establishment personalities, generally being described as an anarchist cooperative. This place, and I met an anarchist. I had brought some literature, and this anarchist said, I also have some literature, and we started talking. And I don't know this person's precise orientation as an anarchist, um, but they seem to be, based on the literature they had and what they were saying, a person who was more legitimate anarchist, an anarcho-syndicalist or anarcho-communist inclined person than, say, um, the kind of falsest of anarchists, the anarcho-capitalist, which virtually no serious anarchist really owns or considers to be a part of their sphere of influence. But it's kind of a distinction without a difference, because by prioritizing the abolition of the state over the fight against the forces of private wealth, financial capital, and empire, um, this uh, by identifying as an anarchist, you're um, making much the same mistake as this person who calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, just not in quite so absurd or obvious of a way. Um, and So I was talking to this person about the um, the problems of trying to organize in the United States, which they were familiar with as well. The problems of our times, such as the capitalist climate apocalypse, the lack of groundswell along the lines of an eco-communist cadre to stop the U.S. military-industrial complex run capitalist climate apocalypse, which is the military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter. Of course, it's dramatically worse than that. So not merely the world's worst polluter, but they're the main champion and protector of all of the other major polluters, which has effectively created an inescapable regime of superpollution. That itself is not merely something that happened by accident, that the United States has upheld by its vile nature, but that itself was a contrivance of the United States. If you can recall, there was a time when there were relatively few automobiles on Earth, let's say in the midst of the Second World War, and there were virtually no fossil fuel products of any other kind. And then the United States military-industrial complex, as it stood at that time, said to their industrial partners, we have a serious problem. We built a lot of tanks and jeeps, but we can't complete building them and using them in this war we've been drawn into, even though most of us were Nazi sympathizers a few months ago. We've been drawn into this war. We can't use these tanks because what are they lacking? There's not enough rubber in the world to supply this war. And they said because there's no rubber, we can't really be involved in this war in the way that we've been asked to be. So we need you, good folks, Dow Chemical and DuPont, and so on and so forth, to continue to develop these fossil fuel products for this specific use of replacing rubber, another product that is more artificial. And they said, we'll try. We don't know if we can do that. But they did it. And plastic parts were just appearing on everything in the 1940s. And But particularly, of course, on machines of war. And and Fast forward a few years to 1945. The war is now officially over, and the United States immediately notices that its economy is contracting back a um, into a Great Depression. This, this word Great Depression happens to be trending on Twitter today, um, and on social media today, but contracting back into the Great Depression conditions. And so they did two things of note at that time. They built this pentagram, this Pentagon, and what would today evolve into the $1 trillion a year plus endless war machine, this omnicidal force on the world stage, because permanent war is good for the economy. It's not good for any human beings. It's not good for the sustainability of Earth, but it's good for a bourgeois economy where that really serves the interests of a few people, the ruling elites, some limited thousands of people for the most part. Um, like the other response to the Great Depression, the New Deal programs, which were in a certain light less efficacious than what I've just described, um, in making the bourgeois economy, which of course should not exist in the first place, more viable. That is, um, but like both of those things were a direct response to the existence of state socialism and the prospect of the abolition of private wealth. This is something that harms virtually no one except for these few thousand exceedingly wealthy people who tend to dictate terms to all else, and they get to decide what kind of political economy or representation is allowed to exist. And The other thing, of course, um, that they did at the time that's relevant to this is the massive proliferation of fossil fuel products of consumer kind. Um, of course, most people, when you say um, consuming fossil fuels, they might think of either energy or automobiles themselves, um, which were being used by people on the North American continent and the imperial core pretty regularly by 1940. But another thing that changed was these things became um, um, uh, this through neo-colonial forces spread around the world and more used by a growing population in the imperial core, um, pushing us more into conditions of the straw that breaks the camel's back, of causing runaway overheating from the capitalist climate apocalypse, for example. And But the other thing that changed is a host of consumer goods made with fossil fuels that are nothing to do with transportation or energy, such as single-use plastics, which choke the ocean. Um, so this all really lays at the feet of the United States, right? The United States asserted itself, one might say, around this time of 1945 by, among other things, dropping a bomb, a nuclear bomb, in fact, two nuclear bombs on Japan. And of course, that had almost nothing to do with Japan. It had to do with establishing to the Soviet Union and the rest of the world, um, much of which was crippled. The Soviet Union and the imperial core was crippled by this war. So the United States established itself as those financial elites who are particularly dictating terms to others. Um, and without having done this, it would not have been able to say force in these neo-colonial um, violence of a kind like um, um, forcing much of the global south into onerous debt traps and other things suggestive of sham democracy, which is, of course, what bourgeois democracy is, but even less functional, allowed to be even less functional in those contexts. There, so the liberation of the African continent or other lands was, of course, no liberation at all. Um, and so there is no way of talking about the problems of um, of our time or of the machine without talking about the United States military-industrial complex and the various financial capital-dominated sectors that interlock with it. But this concept of the machine in this title is suggestive of something else, right? And so when I was talking to my friend, my new friend at this makerspace, this subject came up a little bit of a thing that I have read a lot about in recent years. What does it mean to have a people's government in every land? And if you read this sort of a lot of this sort of literature to do with scientific communism, you'll notice this recurring theme, which could be perhaps quickly summed up in this question: was Joseph Stalin the head of the Soviet Union for many decades a good person? Well, one could say that if Stalin weren't there, the Soviet Union might have collapsed at an earlier time and not been able to double life expectancy over the course of 25 years of its people. So it's hard to argue, except when talking about some kind of perhaps perverted ideas about power politics, that Stalin was a bad person. But most people are thinking in these power politics terms. But at the same time, was Joseph Stalin a good person? Is also a question that you could pose, not relative to other heads of state of more poorly conceived bourgeois states, but of people who were, say, genuinely interested in seeing world revolution, a people's government in every land, and genuinely interested in governance that was more flattened, more representative, and differently built in ways that I won't get into because it's a long, long conversation, than the USSR. I don't think you have a lot of right to really talk about this unless you first kind of offer this rider, this caveat, which is that in this world since 1945 that we could call a CIA-run world, almost everything to do with liberation thought or revolutionary thought, this CIA-run world has produced some kind of narrative perversion, so that it could just as well be associated with um, the interests of the bourgeois as with genuine liberation. So a person who is talking about these Trotskyist ideas, which I've just alluded to um, today, the obvious question you would ask them is, why are you so obsessed with Joseph Stalin? He's been dead for more than 3/4 of a century, and also, Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So why are we even talking about this? You might ask this person, and an answer would be, well, preoccupation with ancient history, so to speak, and the problems of people who no longer live, the ways in which they're problematic or controversial, is a way of not talking about the actual villain of the story. It was not Joseph Stalin, but is pretty particularly the United States CIA run world and the larger forces of financial capital allied with it, the other intelligence agencies, and such forces in the Imperial Corps. And there's scarcely an area to do with anti-establishment conversations, liberation conversations, revolutionary conversations, scientific socialist and scientific communist conversations, anarcho-syndicalist conversations. There's scarcely an area that have not been had the poisoning of the well, worldwide poisoning of the well. and, and you have to say that, right? You don't get to talk about Trotskyism unless you also say that the real villain in this story is the bourgeoisie. Um, um, that's extremely easy to track. It's extremely easy to track, right? The at the time of the pretty nearly the beginning of the so-called Russian Civil War, at the early part of the 20th century, the forces of Tsarism had been defeated and driven away. But the Imperial Corps, as it stood at the time, which was not the CIA-run world, although the U.S. played a big role in that, but the imperialists, which are still the same countries of 100 years ago, all joined forces to reinstall the Tsar. Why were they Tsarists? Why are they monarchists? Did they want a feudal system? Not really. The United States and these other countries, to a fairly high degree, all tended to have an industrial capitalistic system. It was an industrial capitalistic system that was heavily reliant on this kind of project, which they undertook to sabotage the USSR, which is maintaining the strength of the ruling elites and financial capital, and allowing private wealth to continue to exist, which it was mostly being abolished in the USSR. And so they had to kill this thing in its crib. They did not want anyone to even begin to imagine that financial capital and private wealth could be undermined or done away with. This thing of the imperialist North Atlantic powers forming into a Voltron, a giant, stopping just being individual robots and joining into one giant robot of evil, to stop state socialism from inspiring the masses. They're continuing to spread around the world. Um, this is um, this is a recurring theme in this era then of the CIA run world of the 1950s and on. They were able to successfully do this. They were able to stop um, the state socialist project in the former Soviet Union, Russia, and those other countries. Um, they were able to illegally disband it. Right? It wasn't illegal disbanding. It just was a kangaroo court going on there. The people of the Soviet Union had a popular initiative to bring back state socialism when they realized that it was killing millions of people. The so-called neoliberal shock therapy was killing millions of people. They realized their mistake in wanting Pizza Hut and Western things. And they tried to bring back the Soviet Union, but of course that same Voltron, that same vile alliance of North Atlantic ruling elites made it so that they had no legal recourse to do that. And that's a pretty well a defining feature of this CIA-run world, making it so there is no legal recourse to do anything that good that you would want to do. And so this what is this Messiah and what is this machine? Well, when you ask questions like how is there not a people's government in every land, you are asking this a question of what is this Messiah. So the main contradiction within serious anti-establishment and revolution-minded communities, most notably those of scientific socialists and scientific communists, the primary contradiction within those communities is not the larger primary contradiction. The larger primary contradiction is the existence of private wealth, which poisons our world and enslaves human beings as a matter of course. A thing which were it done away with tomorrow, we would have a livable world. It's quite simple as that, and it's quite as simple as people rising up in the millions to see that happen. But this question within this community of why is there no people's government in every land is a confusing one and a contentious one. So when you talk to people in the years before Trotskyism became this thing that may be kind of a bit too polluted by that CIA-run world effect, they would say things like describing the problems of socialism in one country. We can't have socialism in one country until we create a more accommodating atmosphere in the rest of the world that would allow this thing to exist. Quite prescient when you consider what I just described, the CIA-run world and the larger forces of the North Atlantic bourgeoisie just destroying everything good, including state socialist forms, including the possibility of a livable world itself. That's quite prescient, right? No one would say that people like Trotskyists are dead wrong. No serious person, I think. But this is a major contradiction within these communities. When you ask the question, was Joseph Stalin a good socialist or not? The answer has to be relative to relative to almost every institution as it stood at the time. He was a good person. Relative to the people posing that set of questions, you could make the case that he was not the absolute best. Again, I don't think anyone has any leg to stand on to say any of that without saying, first and foremost, fuck the United States military industrial complex, fuck the CIA run world, fuck the bourgeoisie who are the real problem there. We would have had things like council communism or real Soviets. The Soviet Union would not be a misnomer, a literal misnomer in its actual existence, in its actual economic formation. This actual political economy was a misnomer. We would have had these better things were it not for these bourgeois saboteurs, constantly menaced and threatened. There was never a moment in its existence where it was not um, being having forces like those pro-czarist forces undermining the viability of the state. There was never. It became the narrative became different. The major, the most prevalent narrative became different, but there was never a moment where it was not that same thing, trying to reinstall the czar and spending a ton of money to do that, and killing a bunch of people, a million people, to do that. Like what sort of person just kills a million civilians to reinstall a king? That doesn't even make any fucking sense. But it doesn't have to make sense, right? Because people, the lumpen proletariat who engage with this, which is basically everybody, they'll tend to engage with it on a false narrative, something maybe to do with religious literalism, and to do with 100 different kinds of nationalist idiocy, and the actual agenda of avoiding any threat to vast fortunes already in existence, which should not exist if you want a livable world, that is obscured or completely ignored. Um, and so then, why was there no world revolution? Why was there no people's government in every land? The other part, the question that is begged here is because, well, why is that such a big contradiction within these communities? Um, uh, because the kind of organization that could lead to something like a global governance structure or represent the higher level of representation that had ever existed, um, the technology didn't exist, right? So fast forward now to the 21st century, we have our. I don't think any serious person would absolutely deny that we are in the midst of something like an advanced computing takeoff, an AI takeoff, AI takeoff effects. A person would correctly say that it is a bourgeois AI takeoff. Well, I've never heard someone use those words in succession until I started saying bourgeois AI takeoff versus people's AI takeoff. And I listen to a lot of other people talk about this sort of thing. Um, but this bourgeois AI takeoff, um, which is a hyper capitalistic hastening of the capitalist climate apocalypse, nothing more than that. But nevertheless, within that are powerful weapons. In fact, I would say that AI, advanced computing, is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, bar none, because this ability, for example, in the form of a large language model to recreate a human's work product, more than recreate it, really. Um, I can't write 80 pages of academic copy in 42 seconds. But an LLM that I have access to can absolutely write 80 pages of academic copy in a matter of seconds. Um, but of course, the situation with advanced computing and as it relates to an AI takeoff is more than the mere regurgitation of pseudo intellectual or slightly better material. It is in 2023 or 2024, you would say that was the situation. But in 2025, we are moving into a different situation, the existence of AI agents, which are able to say, not just at your behest, do a tremendous amount of writing, but also at your behest, let's say, take over your computer and work on a project for you while you take a nap. And then when you wake up, you say, look at all this work I've done, even though I was fast asleep. This is an unusual situation. But even that, in this bourgeois AI takeoff context, is again not terribly meaningful. This is a major reason. You know, you have a lot pretty intelligent, although rather devious and delusional people working at a company like Google, say 15 years ago, but they realize all of this, most of this, and they realize there's some that they probably wouldn't openly acknowledge even in like a boardroom, but they realize that this bourgeois AI takeoff is not built to um, to help people. It's built to protect financial capital and empire. Google doesn't work for you, right? If you ask the question, why? How did Google have all of this computing power and research and development along these lines, but not build something approximating artificial general intelligence until other people started doing it, and then they started rolling out comparable products? The answer is, well, they don't fucking work for you, right? You are um, um, their their product, and their customer is the United States military and other forces of financial capital. Um, and for them to build an AGI that you get to use, that would pretty well be contradicting the essential operating principles of their organization. They're basically just an overgrown military contractor that has overgrown and also has a different public profile, but that's what they are. And this so this is an important point that you should repeat to people, that capitalists and imperialists, it is not in their nature to build artificial general intelligence. It might be in their nature to wring their hands about the existence of artificial intelligence and clutch pearls about the existence of artificial intelligence and talk a blue streak till the cows come home about artificial intelligence, but it's not in their nature to appropriately use this. Um, it is in the people's nature, so this thing which is problematic, the large language model agent, as built by Google or OpenAI, another infamous misnomer. Um, they were built as an AI safe. At the earliest stages, they were intended to be an open source focused and AI safety focused organization, bringing AGI to the masses. About the most socialistic mandate that you can imagine. But of course, they immediately did this thing that Google did in the early 2000s of instead becoming an overgrown military contractor, an abomination, the very opposite of what you would want it to be. Um, and and so when you ask yourself, what is a people's government in every land? Why was this so complicated for people to talk about? And in decades past, or 100 years ago, was because the systems sophistication and the advanced computing sophistication, the algorithmic sophistication, and other computing disciplines related there, did not exist to build something of a genuinely world revolutionary implication, right? So basically, every person who was a scientific socialist was guilty of what my anarchist, new anarchist acquaintance would have been guilty of because of um, the inability to move beyond this aspirational position. Not because they were confusing the primary contradiction with the secondary contradiction, but because there was no path uh, to building something that sophisticated that it could say give everyone full representation and could run industrial sectors and could um, do all of that whilst abolishing financial capital. Um, it was um, um, when people refer to Marxists as being something like Christianists, that's what they're saying, right? They're saying this is by its nature a utopian thing, and that's never a fair assessment. To say that people fighting for a better world are just being unrealistic, um, but it should not be dismissed out of hand. But that's not anymore the world that we live in today. A good thing for contextualizing that would be reading the book The Republic of Walmart, which is unfortunately not written uh, from a 100% scientific communist point of view or a 100% cybernetic communist point of view, better still. But it is a book that is heady enough and touches upon these themes of full automation as it relates to a political economy. High automation, full automation. I don't know what was full automation. Everything is machine. I don't know. High automation as it relates to a political economy. Um, and the well, I touched upon the things that I wanted to touch upon in terms of um, talking about 19th and 20th century ideas and systems. I haven't quite touched upon what happens in the 21st century because I can't quite touch a crystal ball, so I don't know. But I can tell you that um, um, it shouldn't be that hard to expand on the idea of this open source large language model AI agent as a transformative force in this world. So there are many sectors of computer science, many fields of computer science of real interest or of potential interest in the future to producing transformative or even revolutionary effects. But of none of them would you say what you would say of machine learning, which is that in 2025 they have a readily available proto AI agent type thing that is open source or even available to human beings, even available to ordinary workers. So machine learning is then necessarily a kind of focus of this for the time being. Um, but you wouldn't say that a revolutionary effect would be limited to LLMs or machine learning. Although I think that people who make a lot of political hay out of that, or a lot of academic hay out of that, are people who would be tending to want to diminish the effect of the proletariat on this discipline. But so this, well, what is this? This was a question that my friend asked me. I began to describe um, the AI agent as not an individualistic phenomena, but as a massified workforce multiplier, having a transformative effect on society, and being that missing ingredient, that missing link that I described, that it created so much contention in serious revolutionary communities. Um, and So I described people's superintelligence, even of limited to thousands of users who have downloaded a specially tailored open source large language model, which all open source large language models have a couple of elements. They tend to have some network capability to varying degrees, and they have a prompt that you are typing something into to have a conversation with this open source large language model. And both of those things could be tweaked just a little bit to build a thing that creates an agentic core that is, say, thousands or many more people have downloaded the specially tailored large language model, and they leave it on, and it's made to work with other large language models on projects of interest. And just like the AI agent, where you take a nap and you wake up and you say, "What great work I've done," now with this agentic core, you have a large number of people doing work of real interest, not just getting you sushi money, but maybe doing things like stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, stopping the extinction of humankind. The only job, you got one job to do in this world, and that's to stop your species from becoming extinct. Like anything else that you're doing, fucking stop doing it. Stop the presses, stop doing the stupid shit that you're doing, and start working on stopping the extinction of your species. I shouldn't have to say this out loud, but I have to say it over and over again to everyone that I meet. And this people's superintelligence, or a vanguard network for people's superintelligence, this massified workforce multiplier of an agentic core that I've just described. This would have just been gibberish to someone just a few years ago. Even when technological planned economies were being built and sabotaged by those very forces of the bourgeoisie, which happened more than half a century ago. Chile, for example, just one example of a technological planned economy, but the one that was being built in a real way under the government of Salvador Allende, effectively a elected Marxist-Leninist government, wasn't an elected Marxist-Leninist government, so a scientific socialist government, was building a quite unique technological planned economy, which would have been a springboard for some other path to a people's superintelligence. And people writing about this in USSR and elsewheres, and in Chile and elsewhere, were well aware of this concept of technoscience, specifically having world revolutionary potential. So none of this is terribly new, but what is happening is the state of advanced computing and the availability of advanced computing platforms has become pervasive enough that this sort of thing could be done even even with, even knowing that people as evil as the United States military-industrial complex will install a Pinochet to stop the building of a technological planned economy, right? There's narratives about Pinochet and Allende. Unfortunately, don't talk enough about what people, the Kissingers of the world, really were concerned about, which is, of course, the obvious thing: the ending of financial capital in that place or anywhere else, but also this technoscience having world revolutionary potential. Um, and so um, um, this thing that I've described, the Vanguard Network for People's Superintelligence, or something along those lines, is probably might strike you as being a more anarcho-communist or anarcho-syndicalist approach to this than many scientific communists might prefer. And that is a valid criticism, but again, to fixate on that and not define the real villain of the story, uh, the, say, U.S. warmongers and saboteurs destroying a technological planned economy of the state socialist kind, recurring theme. That's what would have happened in the USSR as well. There was even plans for that. Oh gosh, they were not greenlit in the way that Cybersyn of Allende was greenlit, the technological planned economy there. But they were in existence and had been studied by quite nearly every serious person there. Um, and that's what would have happened as a matter of course, just as we would say now, as a matter of course, as we have popular access to computing and advanced computing, we would see this AI takeoff effect that would have happened in a more orderly and useful way in the Soviet Union had it not been destroyed at precisely the time when network computing was becoming a thing in that country and elsewhere. Um, and so that's not a coincidence, right? Not really. And um, so this criticism of the people's superintelligence as being um, perhaps on its face not so focused on um, uh, the primary contradiction as it should be, would be valid, but you would say that this is a strategic necessity, right? If every project to do with state socialism is easily destroyed by the North Atlantic imperialists, um, maybe you have to try to build something more amorphous or outside of that framework. Um, and so that is what I have tried to interest people in. And I was going to maybe talk to our friend David. I don't know. I don't think he was actually able to stay in the conversation though, because he said something of real interest to me recently, which is something that we had discussed at some length before, which is how do we get people involved? The only way to scale the people's superintelligence would be to find subcultures, existing communities that would begin to work on this project as described, such as the best examples might be Linux enthusiasts. Linux enthusiasts are people who will work on bundling software for the running of an operating system of an open source kind. And it would not be a great hardship to also bundle into that and specially tailored, not so different from the existing large language models, and then have all of these people running this thing on their machines just as soon as they turn it on, And then you have some thousands of people automatically doing this thing that I've described, which is being a sleeping beauty, allowing their AI agents to do this work, and them facilitating it mostly to keep it from AI hallucinating and to keep core fundamentals being focused on. So some people obviously would be more involved with that than others. Um, and um, but there are other communities that might have many of these features, uh, such as could also bundle something like blockchain um, enthusiasts or many, many others, but quite nearly anyone, right? A lot of people have computers, um, but not everybody is a Linux builder. Um, but still, that brings us to the final point here, which is that you don't have to be a computer genius to do this sort of thing anymore. And a term has come into existence in recent weeks and months that describes this called vibe coding. And so vibe coding is a little bit like what I described with this AI agent taking over your computer, but that remains a more speculative thing for most people. You can pay for a service right now with AI agents taking over your computer. If you want an open source AI agent to take over your computer, the job is not done quite so well in as of April the 3rd, 2025. Um, um, but the job of being a project manager with coders doing work for you can be done by anyone, even if you have no coding understanding, low coding understanding, let's say, and if you have no other coders who are working for you. And that is essentially what's occurring with this process of vibe coding. So even if you don't use a dedicated LLM, there are, well, I'm not going to recommend that you use XAI, Twitter's built-in chatbot for this, because you really should go to an open source LLM, at least an online open source LLM that's not pure evil. Let's say instead of going to Twitter, you take the extra 3 seconds that it would take to go to qwen.ai, a less evil organization, an open source LLM. You can download Qwen and do this work offline as well. But let's say you go to qwen.ai and like just the internal services that you can use on your phone or on Twitter along these lines that are very easy to use. You say to qwen.ai, I have a problem. I need to build a program. The program does X, Y, and Z, but I don't know how to find the existing code to build that program, and I don't really know how to construct that. I don't even know what applications I would need to use. And it says, well, download these 3 applications, open them up, open up an instantiation of Notepad, prepare to open up a few instantiations of Notepad, prepare to open up a command prompt and such things a few times. And when you type these words, all these words into your computer, and you continue this conversation with qwen.ai, you have taken a step now toward the building of this application that you desire to build. And when you've done this many thousands of times, this process of copying and pasting whatever Qwen tells you to do into whatever place it tells you to put it, now you have an application. That's not the most fun thing that you could absolutely be doing in the world, but it is of real interest. It is of real interest because, as I said, the rudiments of the people's superintelligence, especially tailored large language model, is not so different from the existing large language model. The thing which could be a workforce multiplier with world revolutionary potential is not so different from the thing that already exists in an open source form. Um, and I would encourage you again to start working with folks. Maybe you know some young students who are supposed to be working together on a project. That would be a good group of people to start building the people's superintelligence. It's a major problem of that I touched upon before. Why Google hasn't built superintelligence is because it's not their job, because they're afraid of it, and because really it's not in their nature, right? It's in the nature of human beings who are acting in workers' interests to do this sort of thing. Um, Hypercapitalists can't actually build artificial superintelligence. They can build things that have features of artificial superintelligence, but at the end of the day, what they'll do with that thing is shit the bed, not actually build something of interest or use. Um, but this thing of even middle school or high school students or college students working on this as a project. Well, this is all of our doctoral dissertation. The whole department's doctoral dissertation is the building of the people's superintelligence. So now we have 400 people from this department all running this thing on their machine. That would be a thing to do, right? Or the young students, even. You know, anybody can vibe code. Anybody over the age of 8 can vibe code. Um, and I leave you with that. The stopping of the capitalist climate apocalypse is job one. If you're not doing that with your life, I respectfully submit that you are human garbage. I respectfully submit that that's quite nearly everyone on Earth, certainly everyone of European descent in the country where I live, and a lot of those people, a lot of everyone is just kind of prevented from doing this. Um, but still, yeah, you try a little harder, right? So we're only talking about the extinction of the species, right? Um, and so I'll leave before I kind of go off on the inspirational trip. I'll call back my new anarchist friend who said, "What does this thing do?" Right? What? So what? So what if you have 100,000 people with in this agentic core formation? How does that specifically put pressure on the a capitalist climate apocalypse criminals? I would say that a person who would say that is a person that doesn't have very much imagination, or maybe just doesn't have the kind of immersion in present day advanced computing, and technoscience to really allow them to envision that. But you know, like you could say the same thing, but concern trolling about Luigi Mangione in bad faith. How does Luigi Mangione put pressure on um, um, the for-profit death care abomination of the United States, particularly in that case, for-profit health insurance? Insurance. How does he put pressure on that? Well, if you can't see that, I don't know what to tell you. Let's try and shoot a couple of more fucking executives, and we'll find out. What happens when you have 100,000 people all working in this way instead of one person engaging with the propaganda of the deed? You have a cadre doing that sort of work. Um, that's a transformative thing. That's a transformative thing. And if you don't see that, it's because you don't want to see that. It's because you're invested in the status quo, because you're prevented from thinking in those terms, um, or you're just adult, right? You're just the kind of person who would say, well, we had a good run as a species, but let's just accept that the capitalist climate apocalypse is going to kill us all. Which I should also say is if you've ever uttered words of those kinds, you have uttered the most racist words that almost anyone has ever said, right? Because let's suppose, for example, you say, well, I don't think everyone will die. I just think that a lot of people will die. Irrespective of the fact that you will almost certainly be one of those most people who die. Um, what you're really saying is, I have accepted the Eurocentric paradigm to such a degree that I will allow the criminals of the Eurocentric paradigm institutions to, through malformed, um, even malevolent functioning of industrial capitalistic sectors, to cause the death of, oh, it's not everyone. It's just most of the people in the global south, right? It's not everyone. It's just most of the black and brown skinned folks on earth. Oh, okay. Well, that's not bad. But again, you won't find a European person, a European descended person, who doesn't basically say this when prompted. You don't find, just as you don't find a European person who, a European descended person you wouldn't just as well describe as a KKK motherfucker. That is who European descended people are. And if that were not the case, this apocalypse would not be going on. But we can stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. It's not a bridge too far. It is a thing that could be done with the building of the people's superintelligence, or through ordinary 19th or 20th century revolutionary projects. But when a person says to me, I don't like this, people say I bullshit. Let's just do the revolution as I understand it in the books that I have read. Okay. If you don't want to use the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, I assume it's because doing that would interfere with your program of already having 10 million people bivouacked outside of the Pentagon, preparing to stop the fucking imperial fascist climate apocalypse, right? Let's stop the world's worst polluter and protector of all other super polluters. Oh, but where are those 10 million people? Where are those millions of people with AR-15 in hand, descending upon these fascist bastions? They don't exist. They're all individualistic. They're all isolated. They are not in the appropriate cadre formation. So when you say to me, I don't want to use the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, what you're really saying is, I am not prepared to challenge the status quo. And I'm going to make it sound like it's about something else, but we all know that's really because I am like all of these other European descended, basically fascist pigs, a person who is intellectually dishonest and morally cowardly to the point where they will contribute to the death of our species. But if we stop this capitalist climate apocalypse with a people's superintelligence, for example, we will see the true people's AI take off, and we will see effects well beyond even a low bar. I consider a low bar to be the stopping of the capitalist climate apocalypse by this thing with many tens or hundreds of millions of people, the people's superintelligence operating in this formation that I've described. I consider that a low bar. Consider it a low bar to build an AI-powered single-payer public health service in every nation, and ultimately for all people, providing not just higher quality healthcare, but the option to live as long as one would like. Universal super longevity. I consider that a low bar based on the existing resources that are squandered at present, but could be better used. But in this people's AI takeoff paradigm, we can see things that we can scarcely imagine. And again, if you're not inclined to imagine them and not inclined to build this thing in anticipation of those things you can't quite see, I would contend that that is because you are an agent of the status quo more than you might be willing to admit. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day, you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, very soon, my dear comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.